thrilling excitement held me, and that it were worth life and death to fly thus, if but for once, as I had always dreamed that men might some day do. Higher and higher we went. The earth lay far beneath, and I saw now that Paris was indeed a mighty city, its vast mass of buildings stretching away almost to the horizon below us. A mighty city of the future that had been given my eyes to look on. There were other winged cars darting to and fro in the air about us, and they said that many of these were starting or finishing journeys of hundreds of leagues in the air. Then I cried out as I saw a great shape coming nearer us in the air. It was many rods in length, tapering to a point at both ends, a vast ship sailing in the air. There were great cabins on its lower part, and in them we glimpsed people gazing out, coming and going inside, dancing even. They told me that the vast ships of the air like this sailed to and fro for thousands of leagues, with hundreds inside them. The huge vessel of the air passed us, and then our winged car began to descend. It circled smoothly down to the field like a swooping bird, and when we landed there, Rastin and Thicourt led me back to the ground vehicle. It was late afternoon by then, the sun sinking westward, and darkness had descended by the time we rolled back into the great city. But in that city was not darkness. Lights were everywhere in it, flashing brilliant lights that shone from its mighty buildings, and that blinked and burned and ran like water in great symbols upon the buildings above the streets. Their glare was like that of day. We stopped before a great building into which Rastin and Thicourt led me. It was vast inside, and in it were many people in rows on rows of seats. I thought it a cathedral at first, but saw soon that it was not. The wall at one end of it, toward which all in it were gazing, had on it pictures of people, great in size, and those pictures were moving as though themselves alive. And they were talking to one another, too, as though with living voices. I trembled. What magic! With Rastin and Thicourt in seats beside me, I watched the pictures enthralled. It was like looking through a great window into strange worlds. I saw the sea, seemingly tossing and roaring there before me, and then saw on it a ship, a vast ship of size incredible, without sails or oars, holding thousands of people. I seemed on that ship as I watched, seemed moving forward with it. They told me it was sailing over the western ocean that never men had crossed. I feared. Then another scene, land appearing from the ship, a great statue upholding a torch, and we on the ship seemed passing beneath it. They said that the ship was approaching a city, the city of New York, but mists hid all before us. Then suddenly the mists before the ship cleared, and there before me seemed the city. Mother of God, what a city! Climbing range on range of great mountain-like buildings that aspired up as though to scale heaven itself. Far beneath, narrow streets pierced through them, and in the picture we seemed to land from the ship to go through these streets of the city. It was an incredible city of madness. The streets and ways were mere chasms between the sky-toppling buildings. People, 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 millions on millions of them rushed through the endless streets. Countless ground vehicles rushed to and fro also, and other different ones that roared above the streets, and still others below them. Winged flying cars and great airships were sailing to and fro over the titanic city, and in the waters around it great ships of the sea and smaller ships were coming as man never dreamed of surely, that reached out from the mighty city on all sides. And with the coming of darkness the city blazed with living light. The pictures changed, showed other mighty cities, though none so terrible as that one. It showed great mechanisms that appalled me, giant metal things that scooped in an instant from the earth as much as a man might dig in days, vast things that poured molten metal from them like water, others that lifted loads that hundreds of men and oxen could not have stirred. They showed men of knowledge like Rastin and Thicourt beside me. Some were healers, working miraculous cures in a way that I could not understand. Others were gazing through giant tubes at the stars, and the pictures showed what they saw, showed that all of the stars were great suns like our sun, and that our sun was greater than Earth, that Earth moved around it instead of the reverse. How could such things be, I wondered? Yet they said that it was so, that Earth was round like an apple, and that with other Earths like it the planets moved around the sun. I heard, but could scarce understand. At last Rastin and Thicourt led me out of that place of living pictures and to their ground vehicle. We went again through the streets to their building, where first I had found myself. As we went, I saw that none challenged my right to go, nor asked who was my lord. And Rastin said that none now had lords, but that all were lord, king, and priest, and noble, having no more power than any in the land. Each man was his own master. It was what I had hardly dared to hope for in my own time, and this, I thought, was greatest of all the marvels they had shown me. We entered again their building, but Rastin and Thicourt took me first to another room than the one in which I had found myself. They said that their men of knowledge were gathered there to hear of their feat, and to have it proved to them. "You would not be afraid to return to your own time, Henri?" asked Rastin, and I shook my head. "I want to return," I told them. "I want to tell my people there what I have seen, what the future is that they must strive for." "But if they should not believe you?" Thicourt asked. "Still, I must go, must tell them," I said. Rastin grasped my hand. "You are a man, Henri," he said. Then, throwing aside the cloak and hat I had worn outside, they went with me down to the big white-walled room where first I had found myself. It was lit brightly now by many of the shining glass things on ceiling and walls, and in it were many men. They all stared strangely at me and at my clothes, and talked excitedly, so fast that I could not understand. Rastin began to address them. He seemed explaining how he had brought me from my own time to his. He used many terms and words that I could not understand, incomprehensible references and phrases, and I could understand but little. I heard again the names of Einstein and De Sitter that I had heard before, repeated frequently by these men as they disputed with Rastin and Thicourt. They seemed disputing about me. One big man was saying, "Impossible, I tell you, Rastin, you have faked this fellow." Rastin smiled. "You don't believe that Thicourt and I brought him here from his own time across 5 centuries?" A chorus of excited negatives answered him. He had me stand up and speak to them. They asked me many questions, part of which I could not understand. I told them of my life, and of the city of my own time, and of king and priest and noble, and of the many simple things that they seemed quite ignorant of. Some appeared to believe me, but others did not, and again their dispute broke out. "There is a way to settle the argument, gentlemen," said Rastin finally. "How?" all cried. "Thicourt and I brought Henri across 5 centuries by rotating the time dimensions at this spot," he said. "Suppose we reverse that rotation and send him back before your eyes. Would that be proof?" They all said that it would. Rastin turned to me. "Stand on the metal circle, Henri," he said. I did so. All were watching very closely. Thicourt did something quickly with the levers and buttons of the mechanisms in the room. They began to hum, and blue light came from the glass tubes on some. All were quiet, watching me as I stood there on the circle of metal. I met Rastin's eyes, and something in me made me call goodbye to him. He waved his hand and smiled. Thicourt pressed more buttons, and the hum of the mechanism grew louder. Then he reached toward another level. All in the room were tense, and I was tense. Then I saw Thicourt's arm move as he turned one of the many levers. A terrific clap of thunder seemed to break around me, and as I closed my eyes before its shock, I felt myself whirling around and falling at the same time, as though into a maelstrom, just as I had done before. The awful falling sensation ceased in a moment, and the sound subsided. I opened my eyes. I was on the ground at the center of the familiar field from which I had vanished hours before, upon the morning of that day. It was night now, though, for that day, I had spent 500 years in the future. There were many people gathered around the field, fearful, and they screamed, and some fled when I appeared in the thunderclap. I went toward those who remained. My mind was full of things I had seen, and I wanted to tell them of these things. I wanted to tell them how they must work ever toward the future time of wonder. But they did not listen. Before I had spoken minutes to them, they cried out on me as a sorcerer and a blasphemer, and seized me and brought me here to the Inquisitor, to you, sire. And to you, sire, I have told the truth in all things. I know that in doing so I have set the seal of my own fate, and that only a sorcerer would tell such a tale. Yet despite that, I am glad. Glad that I have told one, at least, of this time, of what I saw 5 centuries in the future. Glad that I saw. Glad that I saw the things that some day, some time, must come to be. It was a week later that they burned Henri Lothiere. Jean de Marselait, lifting his gaze from his endless parchment accusation and examens on that afternoon, looked out through the window at a thick curl of black smoke going up from the distant square. "Strange, that one," he mused. "A sorcerer, of course. but such a one as I had never heard before. I